Steve, good morning. How are you doing?
Morning, Gary. It's an
How...
early morning. I've got my coffee. It's all good. I've drunk my coffee. It's gone.
how's life in Queenstown? How have things been in Queenstown over the last few months?
Oh, I think it's going to take some time for Queenstown to recover because we're totally reliant on tourism.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are zero international tourists,
Yeah.
absolutely zero. I mean, at Queen's birthday weekend, a while back there, we had quite a few domestic tourists.
Yeah.
It's all a little, small but enthusiastic. But certainly, I don't think we've seen the worst of the economy going down yet. People are slowly realizing, whoa. And what surprises me too is that, we're supposed to have our international borders chopped.
Right.
And so that meant the people living in Queenstown, or the people who are in Queenstown at the moment, should be, the Queenstown population. It was amazing how many, or it is amazing how many are actually migrants. That
Wow.
we have, I'd say less than 50% are actually New Zealanders. And it's a very homogenous international community that's left here through
Interesting.
coronavirus shutdown.
Yeah, interesting.
Anyway, we're a tourist town, and I don't want to sound gloomy, but things aren't looking good here.
Right. All right. So we need to change that then. It's
our
on
job.
our shoulders, you and me. Fantastic. Steve, I want to start with asking a question of really taking you back many years ago. You're in many ways in New Zealand and probably worldwide, you are sort of a legend in the sports of endurance, the sports of adventure. How did you get into that? When did it start for you?
Good question. It started probably as a kid. The New Zealand typical lifestyle of my young generation was that families go to the beach to camp for the Christmas holidays, the summer holidays. And so I'd so look forward to that. Mum and Dad just take us as little kids, to the beach, and we'd have 2 weeks in a tent.
Yeah.
The whole, 4 kids and 2 mum and dad. And so we just adventure, we'd be out in the sand dunes, we'd be hills up the back, it's in the Coromandel Peninsula. So there's lots and lots of bush to play around in, and we had an old canoe, and you just became at ease with the wilderness, and it was none of this PlayStation, spending your time in front of a screen. It was mum and dad would always kick us out the door, go and play. And, the usual thing like building tree huts and go-karts and things like that when we're, back at home. But so I guess I'm glad it was my parents. And then that introduced me to the outdoors in a very basic way. Then there was the Boys Brigade, which is like Scouts. And we were out tramping probably 2 weekends out of every month, overnight with big packs on up in the bush, around Lake Waikaremoana or Hikawai in the Coromandel Peninsula, wherever we could find adventures. And it gave me a real confidence and love of New Zealand bush and mountains and lakes and rivers. And so when at university, I heard about this newfangled race called the Coast to Coast that started on the west coast of the South Island and finished on the east coast. And in between those two start and finish destinations were a range of mountains called the Southern Alps. And that called upon us to, I had to learn whitewater kayaking and rock running and of course biking. And so, yeah, it was just a natural progression that I felt this was a really cool adventure. And there were prizes. I mean, the prizes weren't very good at first, but I'm just cutting a long story short that I loved that so much, and being called upon to be resilient with, because things never go correct as you planned. You never have a perfect race when you're in the wilderness. To get a kind of a perfect race, you have to go around a 400-meter track, don't you? But what we love about adventure sport is that you need skills and to be able to adjust to the risk and the things that go wrong all the time. And so the winners are the ones who are most innovative and adaptable. It wasn't apparent at the time when I first learned about and started these races, but the competition ended up being a very important part of it. I didn't discover that until years later, when I had to stop racing with injury, and that was the end, retire from racing, that I got severely depressed. And it was all around the competition. Why was competition so important now that I can't have it?
Mm.
Um, and of course, that's the subject of a whole subject of a book, which I've
Yeah.
written. I've written 2 books actually.
Right. Okay.
And the things I learned about, the answer to the meaning of life and all that esoteric type stuff. So, your question was, how did I get into it? So basically, as a boy, love of the wilderness and the mountains, and it does bother me actually, Gary, that there's not many, relatively speaking, there's not many young generation that are actually getting out into the wilderness, and if they do, it's in a very controlled health and safety, bland method. We're a tourist guide or whatever, and it's
Mm.
not the true. I don't think the listen to me, I'm sounding like an old fart, but the younger generation are missing out on something here. And I do worry about their ability to deal with climate change and that sort of thing when we do get
Right.
extreme storms and flooding and power blackouts. These guys are going to be so dependent on systems that aren't really related to self-reliance.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, here you go. There's a business idea here for you to bring into Queenstown and save the country.
Oh,
So
it already exists, and they do a wonderful job. The Outdoor Pursuit Centre and people like that, that are Graham Dingle, Project K, all those sorts of things that are they're just tirelessly working in the background, giving to these generally underprivileged kids that are lucky enough to get a sponsor or an organisation to put them through a course like that,
yeah.
or schools, I suppose, but there's only a few that get to do this, and it's not an easy job, but
Mm.
for
Yeah.
someone, for the organizer.
Yeah. So with your, I want to take you and focus a little bit about the racing days and getting ready. What would, when you were training, when you were preparing for a race, what would your week be like? How would you train?
Yeah, so I I was working as an engineer for the first 3 or 4 years once I graduated from university, um, and my training then was jammed in between work, and the weekends, and it's kind of a lifestyle thing. So those who did okay at these adventure type races like coast to coast and adventure racing, mountain biking, those sorts of things. The other type of people who generally in the weekends they'll be out doing some adventure anyway, out mountain biking for a couple of days, or sea kayaking, or they're, in the mountains skiing, cross country skiing, those sorts of things in their spare time. So it was a pretty easy progression. That's what I was doing in my weekends, and after work, I'd be going down to the beach if it was summer and surf kayaking or something, or going for a mountain bike ride. So it's just a natural progression that in the weekend occasionally you did a race. And so at first it was just recreation, you go out and have fun. Then I decided, well, okay, and then along came competition, and you had to structure your program. Yeah, so it was probably 10 to 20 hours a week training, and for an event like Coast to Coast, the principles of training are numerous, but the basic ones are you show your body separately the duration you'll be out racing for. So coast to coast, for example, winning time is 11 hours, 12 hours. So you need to show your body how in the weekends it's going to be out there for a long time. So you might not do the full 12 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday, but you might do a long 8-hour day with kayaking, biking, running. And then then you need to allow recovery time between those hard sessions. That long 8-hour day is a very easy pace.
Mm-hmm.
So you show your body the two principles of distance and duration separately to intensity. And so once you've recovered from the long hard day, which might be 3 or 4 days, then you show it some intensity by doing intervals up a hill for 4 minutes at a time, times 5 or whatever.
Yeah.
So you're doing shorter, sharper sessions, but high intensity. So that's the basics, is duration, intensity, and recovery between all the hard sessions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when I'd been racing for 3 or 4 years, I decided to quit my well-paid engineering job and financially jump off a cliff. You know, it was a bit of suicide really, because no one knew what coast to coast adventure racing was really. And to be a professional, I wasn't, you know, there's no way I was going to be able to compete with those bigger sports like rugby and cricket and the netballs and those sorts of things. So I had to invent a way to raise my profile, become that guy who does the crazy coast to coast sort of thing, you know. And so fortunately I had a fantastic ally, Robin Judkins, the organizer of the coast to coast race. He's a bit eccentric. Well, actually he's very intelligent, but he loves being different. And so we worked together quite well. Promoting my brand and him promoting his coast to coast, and together we sort of unknowingly, we didn't do it on purpose. We just liked being crazy together, and we invented this new sport. And then along came the international scene in about 1990. So it's about 6 years after I started. There's adventure racing came into existence. So as a French company came over here and organized their inaugural adventure race, which is for teams of 4 doing the same sorts of things but over a week. So, you know, kayaking, biking, running in the mountains, but it's continuous. And so that spawned a whole generation of adventure races, and one of them is the God Zone here in New Zealand. The God Zone race is quite famous internationally. And there was the Eco Challenge, that sort of stuff. So there's, in a nutshell, what happened. I committed to racing full time, gave it my job. And my training session, my training ended up being going from 10 to 20 hours a week to more like, well, started off at like 30 hours a week, and that didn't get me the results. So I thought, oh, I better train for 40 hours a week, and I ended up doing 55 hours a week training. That's actual time out there, not in the gym and stuff. It's actually out in the wilderness, and ended up being overtraining, and ended up kind of quite grumpy and not getting the results. Actually, my results got worse. So, and you don't really notice it. It's only the others around you that's saying, you're so grumpy, what's going on? You realize after going to see your coach or whatever that it's overtraining. So there's a bit of adjustment, trial and error to see what's the optimal. But my week of training would look like much like what I described. Saturday would be perhaps a 10-hour day at slow pace, but simulating the race. I might do a 2-hour bike ride followed by a 3-hour run, followed by a half-hour bike ride, followed by a 5-hour kayak and a bit of cycling at the end to simulate what the race would look like, but at low pace. And then I'd have another smaller version of that on Wednesday, and then in between there'd be lots of intervals, uphills on your bike or uphills on running and sprint training and kayaks, stuff like that.
Yeah.
The one thing I haven't included was skills. I haven't talked about is skills. There was a lot of skills that I built into my training. You can't be good at coast to coast by training running on the road. You've got to run on rocks and rough ground and with stormy weather and river crossings. So you simulate that by running knee deep at the beach. Where I lived, and same with kayaking. You can't get good at whitewater kayaking by training on the flat water. Yeah. It's no use being really, really fit, the fittest, unless you have the skills. So a lot of my training would be those specific skill sessions and getting proprioception and ankle strength and those sorts of things.
Yeah. So that was obviously extremely difficult, both physically and mentally. Did you have times and periods where you said, that's it, I've had enough, I don't want to do this anymore?
No, I loved it. No, I mean, I had a very wise mentor. I called him Yoda. He was short and wrinkly. He lived till 96 years old. So he died, 8 years ago or something. And Graham Felton. And he said to me, Steve, the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. And, I looked at it and thought, well, man, these long grinding hours on the bike, 6-hour bike, man, that was painful. But I only ever connected that with the end goal. So, okay, if I'm finding this hard, everyone else is finding it hard, I'll just go a bit further. So I can put up with pain even more than those guys. That's how I'm going to win, by training harder, putting up with the mental aspects, being stronger mentally than those guys. So I never said, no, that's it. I never even came close.
Yeah.
the closest I would have come would have been leptospirosis. You know, halfway through, 10 years into my 20-year career, I got this disease from bats in a cave we were racing through in Borneo, and came down. I was this close to dying, and I was unconscious in an ICU with 3 machines keeping me alive. After that, things got pretty tough. And I did have to question, is it really something I want to do when the doctors are telling you not to race anymore because your kidneys had failed? And I had a $92,000 hospital bill. That, back in '95, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was going to be a long, hard struggle out of that. But no, I always knew in the back of my mind, this is just going to make me stronger, you know?
Yeah.
Thought,
Yeah.
that which doesn't kill you can only make you stronger.
Right.
So, and I think that the point here is, when there's something you love doing, Gary, whether it be business, whether it be any goal, the trick is to find a goal or set your goals such that they connect strongly to your intrinsic values. You know, by doing this goal, how will it improve my feeling of purpose and making a difference, or whatever it is that your goal is? Yeah. And then if you've connected it really strongly to your inner drive, then you won't fail at any goal. You know, you'll find a way to achieve it.
Yeah. Well, that was very nice and very philosophical.
Well, that's actually,
you are becoming Yoda now.
Yeah, well, and that's, I must qualify that, Gary, because sometimes it's an unconscious thing. I stumbled upon this, you know. I just loved my racing, and I just loved being out in the wilderness and competing. And I didn't know why I wanted to compete. I was unconscious to that until later on. But it did satisfy every value in my list. So, and now that we're older and wiser, I think we can do that on purpose. You know, so the older we get, the more choices and decisions we have to make. So we have to decide, or have a little measuring tape. Is how much does this matter on my list? You know, on my values.
Yeah. Interesting. So you've won many races. You've traveled all around the world. Have done many things. And due to injury, you have retired a few years ago. What are you doing now?
I'm speaking. I'm a conference speaker. So I talk about this sort of thing. People want to know how to win. You know, they see that I dominated my sport, and I remember my first invitation to come and speak to it was a breakfast. A radio station had a breakfast club thing, and they said, "Oh, come tell us about winning your races." And I didn't want to, because I absolutely hated public speaking. Absolutely, you know, I cringed at the thought. And so, but I was desperate for money, and they were paying me, you know, $500 or something. Like, okay, so I'll cut a long story short. It's kind of a funny story. I'll tell you the brief version. I bought the secondhand slide projector and made some slides in the old days with slides, no PowerPoint. Because a mate who was a good speaker said, just tell stories about pictures, you know, put a picture up on the wall and tell us. So that was going fine until the slide projector melted the slide. And there's only a few minutes into it. And so it went disastrously, and I just couldn't wait to get out of that meeting. And I promised I'd never go speaking again, but eventually, you know, it wasn't just the money. It was that you could, you know, felt like you were imparting some wisdom and making a bit of a difference to these people. And so I joined Toastmasters and got good enough over 10 years to ended up, it just evolved really. And I enjoyed it more and more. So I thought I'd better train myself to get better. And now I've become a professional speaker. And sport is a fantastic metaphor. Because I mean, speaking successfully, I believe it's about telling stories, but telling them in a way that there's some really good learnings that people can apply in their own life. Because you get really bored just by being told the theory of something. We humans, since we've been walking this planet, have passed on knowledge via stories. You know, it's only recently that we've had a method of putting them on paper or, you know, on a screen. So stories are the way to go.
Yeah. So companies, organizations now give you a call and say, "Hey, Steve, you've been a winner. Come and talk to us about winning. Come and teach our staff how to win." Or What do you talk about? Is it the mindset or the physical part? What?
Yeah, yeah. So um, I've trained a lot in NLP during my racing. I wanted to know what made my brain tick and how could I improve that motivation. NLP sounds fancy. It's neuro linguistic programming.
Mhm.
Um, it's not programming. It's that they're just the people who developed in the 1970s. Um, were computer programmers or something, so they can include it in the name. But it's basically understanding what do people do in their heads that gets them the results they want in their life, whether those results or they get in their lives, whether those results are results that they want or whether they're things that they don't want, like phobias or fear. And so we're understanding what do the people say to themselves, what do they remember in terms of visuals, and how do they feel about that, um, and how can we study people who do it successfully and model or copy what they do onto people who want to improve what they're doing. So it's a modeling process really, and teaching.
Yeah.
And so that's a large part of what I speak about is what is the mindset of winning, and what obstacles do we put in our way, and how can we remove those or get around them, find a way to get under or whatever. And um, so essentially it's just the study of success. How can we pass it on in a way that's consistent and fun and easy to learn.
Yeah, interesting. Speaking of obstacles, we are now facing the whole world is facing a bit of an obstacle right now. So how has the whole Corona thing affected you? And if you were going to talk to businesses right now, would invite you and say, "Hey, look, we're stuck. We're struggling with the Corona." What would be some guidelines or ideas that you would give them to overcome that obstacle?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That's a good question. I've spent lockdown going through quite a roller coaster myself. So uh, I've actually written a book. My second book was called Eating Dirt,
Mhm.
about resilience. It's stories, as I said just before. It's about storytelling, but I've chosen stories that I think are relevant. And then I did some research. So um, I've got, I had that leptospirosis where I was near dead and came back, and I won even more races after that. I was even more successful because I studied a wee bit about what obstacles I was putting in my way, this NLP stuff. Number two, I've lived through the Christchurch earthquakes, and my house was smashed, my property was written off, red zoned, and I had to buy another house here in Queenstown instead. But I lived in the Christchurch community for some 3 years after the quakes, and I watched how the city rebuilt itself and what worked and what didn't work. It's still rebuilding itself, 11 years later, but there's a lot to learn from the resilience or not of the Christchurch city and the people of it. And then, of course, adventure racing is resilience itself as well. As I mentioned at the start of this interview, that nothing ever goes to plan in an adventure race, and the winners are those who are able to pivot and adjust and be resilient the quickest. And
Yeah,
so that's some really good material to talk about now, that we have to rebuild ourselves, we have to pivot, and businesses, it's not just about winning, it's about even surviving. So,
mm,
and that's another great metaphor that adventure brings up. Sometimes an adventure is not even a race, it's just about making it through safely. And so that's a fantastic metaphor. But another area I like to talk on, because I've been there, done that, was depression,
mm,
mental health. And it's become very popular. I believe this week's Men's Mental Health Week.
right.
And every year I usually get requested to come and talk to businesses about men's health, especially. And mental health. So having been depressed quite badly, when I finished my racing, I did a lot of study into this, and understanding, what was going in my brain. Uh, and of course, I got a lot of counselling and help. But I now like to pass that knowledge on,
Mm,
because there are many businesses that need that at the moment. How can we up our mental health to get through this? Um, and so that's another thing I like to talk about post COVID or during this recovery, is how can we boost that um, and avoid suicides. There's been a rise in suicides, and how can we not only boost it but actually even learn from this? Because one of the things about resilience, the science of resilience, it shows that there is no resilience gene. You know, some people argue that there is, but we can all learn to be more resilient. And I think that's part of the mindset I'd like to talk about, is how can we not only bounce back, but there's a common phrase called how can we rise in this resilient time? So rise even better than we were before. Don't want to just bounce back to where we want to learn from this, and because it's surely going to be useful for future other things that are going to come our way.
Yeah. Wow. Fantastic. Are you still racing? Are you still doing adventure things? Obviously, as a hobby, I don't think you're doing it professionally, but is it still something that you're doing?
I would love to. As I said, I've been on a bit of a roller coaster during this COVID lockdown myself. And part of that was, you know, sitting back, contemplating life and what's it all about and what should we do from here. And part of that was sadness, actually quite sad that, you know, I've been once upon a time a fantastic fit guy, you know, who could win races, and now I can't. You know, I'm achy and sore and broken at age 57. And, you know, that's part of the sadness I felt during COVID, that I wish I was able to go back and race and into the coast to coast again and feel the glory of standing and the satisfaction of standing on the winner's dais. But so it was quite a philosophical lockdown where I started reading, you know, Viktor Frankl stuff, Man's Search for Meaning, and Eckhart Tolle, and going back over all these books. I've spent some of the time making a bookshelf for my new house, and so I was putting all my books up on the shelf and think, oh, I should read that one again. You know, so I do of course get out and kayak and bike and do adventure. So I'm mostly adventuring now. So one of my most satisfying adventures was kite bugging across the Sahara Desert. I mean, it was 8 years ago now, but or something like that. And you know, that wasn't a race. It was just going from being the first in the world to kite buggy across the Sahara using only wind power, no petrol. And so I do like doing those sorts of adventures. I've got into sailing. I bought a little trailer yacht, and I would love to do some sailing adventures. So it's about understanding that life has different phases, you know, and we're all going to die one day, and that's you know, to learn to accept that and make sure that you don't leave any regrets. You know, that when I'm on my deathbed, whenever that's going to be, that I have ticked off those things that are high on my values list that are going to make a difference to the world. I am going to leave this world a better place for having been here. And and so I guess, you know, now that I'm not racing, that's kind of focus on those more deep and meaningful things.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was fantastic to hear your stories. Fantastic to end it on in such the interview in such a nice way, with thinking about our lives and really living into the fullest. Steve, I really appreciate your time today, and I hope you're going to have an adventureful day today.
Thanks, Harry. I love the deep and meaningful questions you've asked. So it's good that I can see you're interested in making a difference in the world as well. So go for it. Be powerful, my man.
Yeah. Thank you. Fabulous. Thanks, Steve.